The victim mindset will have you dancing with the devil, then complaining you're in hell. There's a lot to think about in this episode, but try to keep this quote in mind. Welcome back, and thank you for wanting to know the facts and the truth. What's going on in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is big. You can't miss it on the news. You can't miss it on college campuses, and you really can't miss it online. But what are the facts? Why is this happening? That's what we're here to answer. Our approach is to examine the major themes and focus on the important events that help you make sense of what's happening today. We care about knowing the truth. We also care about the basic human right to live in peace. We care about ending the suffering. We care about finding justice. And we think you're here because you do too. The only path for us then is to go after the facts and be open to what they show us. Life can be beautiful without hatred, violence, and war, and maybe the way there starts with better understanding each other. Better understanding the Jewish people, the Palestinian people, the history of their conflicts and past peace efforts, and some of the major issues standing in the way of forging real peace. What the Hell is Going On in Gaza is a 9-part series made up of 30 episodes, each designed to help you understand a different but important part of the picture. As part 3 of our series continues, we stay focused on the question, how did we get here? To do that, we'll look back on the significant events that really shape the dynamics of what we're seeing today. Here in episode 15, we'll talk about the refugees of Israel's 1948 War of Independence, including how they became refugees and who bears responsibility for their condition. Let's jump into it. We'll start by talking about the word Nakba. It's used today to refer to the Palestinian exodus that occurred as a result of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Nakba means catastrophe in Arabic. The term Nakba was first coined in 1948 by a Syrian historian named Constantine Zurich. Importantly, he did not blame the Jews. Instead, in his 1948 book, The Meaning of the Disaster, he wrote the following, quote, "When the battle broke out, our public diplomacy began to speak of our imaginary victories, to put the Arab public to sleep and talk of the ability to overcome and win easily, until the Nakba happened. We must admit our mistakes and recognize the extent of our responsibility for the disaster that is our lot." As the word Nakba came into common use, it was first associated with a self-inflicted Palestinian Arab disaster. That was because Arabs at the time knew very well that it was the Arabs who started the war they lost, and they knew very well that they played a significant role in the exodus of Palestinian Arabs during that war. Let's talk for a minute about the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. In 1964, the PLO was founded by Arab nations to establish an Arab state over all of Palestine and expressly to bring about the elimination of the State of Israel through armed struggle. It was the dominant voice for Palestinians for decades. It is internationally recognized as the official representative of the Palestinian people, including by the United Nations. Why does that matter at this point in our story? Because the word Nakba did not appear in the PLO's founding document, the Palestinian Covenant of 1964, nor when the document was revised in 1968. It wasn't until the late 1980s that something big changed. That's when PLO chairman and multi-billionaire through diverted international aid, Yasser Arafat, recognized the value of turning aggressors into victims. Through extensive propaganda, Arafat managed to alter the meaning of Nakba to an Israeli-inflicted injustice. By 1998, Arafat had declared May 15th Nakba Day. He had fully incorporated into the Palestinian national narrative the idea that local Arabs were the victims of an epic catastrophe wrought by the Jews. That was just one of his many impressive public relations achievements. The word Nakba means what it does today only because shrewd propaganda changed its meaning from a self-inflicted catastrophe to a catastrophe caused by the Jews. This history of the word is revealing of what actually happened in 1948 and since. Let's move on now to the causes, to what really happened and what drove so many Palestinian Arabs to leave. What drove this Palestinian exodus? In the chaos and aggression of armed conflict, there were multiple factors at play, multiple dynamics. It was not just one thing. 1. Some Palestinians feared extremist Jewish paramilitary organizations and rumors of their crimes, some of which was unfounded and some was not. Within this category, a smaller number of Palestinians were forcibly expelled. Many left voluntarily, but based on their fear of what might happen if they didn't. A number of Jewish paramilitary organizations had sprung up to defend Jewish settlements from Arab attack in the 1920s and 1930s. By the early 1940s, some had embraced terrorism as a means to push the British out so a Jewish state could be established. After World War II, many of Europe's remaining Jews, the survivors of the Holocaust, were desperate to leave Europe. Country after country refused to admit them, including the United States. Palestine held the promise of a Jewish nation, a nation of their own. The violence only increased when the British refused to reopen immigration to Palestine. When the Arabs attacked in 1947 after the UN approved its partition plan, and then were joined by the armies of surrounding Arab nations in 1948, these paramilitary groups fought back aggressively. 2. Some Palestinians feared roving bands of foreign Arab fighters who blackmailed local Arabs, looted their possessions, and seized their land. Among this group, too, some were forcibly relocated and some left voluntarily, but based on their fear of what might happen if they didn't. 3. Some Palestinians were influenced by the repeated calls of local and foreign Arab leaders to evacuate women, children, and the elderly until the Arab victory over the Jews was achieved. These calls were in part done to use the refugees as a propaganda tool. In its May 3, 1948 edition, Time magazine reported, quote, "The mass evacuation, prompted partly by fear, partly by order of Arab leaders, left the Arab quarter of Haifa a ghost city. By withdrawing Arab workers, their leaders hoped to paralyze Haifa." The Economist reported on October 2, 1948 that, quote, "Of the 62,000 Arabs who formerly lived in Haifa, not more than 5,000 or 6,000 remained. Various factors influenced their decision to seek safety in flight. There is but little doubt that the most potent of these factors were the announcements made over the air by the higher Arab executive, urging Arabs to quit. It was clearly intimated that those Arabs who remained in Haifa and accepted Jewish protection would be regarded as renegades." A Palestinian refugee, Fuad Kadar, said in an interview broadcast on official Palestinian Authority television on May 15, 2013 that, quote, "The one who made us leave was the Jordanian army because they were going to be battles and we would be under their feet. They told us, leave, in 2 hours we will liberate it and then you'll return." 4. As it became clear that Arab armies would not win the war, some Palestinian Arabs simply chose to leave rather than be ruled by Jews. Medium magazine reported a story about the departure of the Arab residents of Haifa in 1948. A truce agreement had been offered to the Arabs. Their response was to ask for assistance in evacuating instead. Medium describes this interaction with Shabtai Levy, the Jewish mayor of Haifa, and the British commander, Major General Hugh Stockwell. Quote, "With tears in his eyes, the elderly Levy pleaded with the Arabs, most of whom were his personal acquaintances, to reconsider, saying that they were committing, quote, a cruel crime against their own people." Yaakov Solomon, a prominent Haifa lawyer and Haganah's chief liaison officer in the city, followed suit, assuring the Arab delegates that he had instructions of the commander of the zone that if they stayed on, they would enjoy equality and peace, and that we, the Jews, were interested in their staying on and the maintenance of harmonious relations. Even the stoic Stockwell was shaken. Quote, "You have made a foolish decision," he thundered at the Arabs. "Think it over, as you'll regret it afterward. You must accept the conditions of the Jews. They are fair enough. Don't permit life to be destroyed senselessly. After all, it was you who began the fighting, and the Jews have won." According to Medium, the next day, the Arab leaders asked again for British trucks to evacuate them. Medium continues, quote, "A senior British officer at the meeting erupted. If you sign your truce, you would automatically get all your food worries over. You are merely starving your own people. We will not sign, the Arabs retorted. All is already lost, and it does not matter if everyone is killed so long as we do not sign the document. Due to the chaos of the time, no one can say for sure how many Palestinians left due to one cause versus another. No doubt many who left were motivated by more than one of these factors. From the perspective of Jewish leaders at the time, the creation of refugees and therefore the responsibility for them was squarely on the shoulders of the Arabs. A decade later, Abba Eban, Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, said, quote, "The Arab refugee problem was caused by a war of aggression launched by the Arab states against Israel in 1947 and 1948. Let there be no mistake, if there had been no war against Israel, with its consequent harvest of bloodshed, misery, panic, and flight, there would be no problem of Arab refugees today. In all wars, mistakes and bad acts happen on both sides, but that doesn't at all make them the same. For those being attacked, the intense pressure felt by young soldiers knowing their lives are in danger, knowing their countrymen have been killed, knowing their families and their way of life might be lost, can lead to some bad results. This is bad, but more forgivable, as the realities and risks of war were forced on them. For those attacking, bad acts can be intentional or can be a byproduct of training and preparation, vilifying and dehumanizing those who are to be attacked. This should be so much less forgivable because they created the volatile and dangerous situation. None of the bad acts on either side would have happened if they hadn't attacked the way they did. This is also very clearly the case with Hamas. Hamas attacked Israel. Hamas committed horrific atrocities. Hamas started a war, creating the situation in which mistakes and even bad acts by some Israeli soldiers were bound to occur. In 1948, it was the Arabs who started the war. In March 1948, Iraqi General Ismail Safwat reported that the Jews were not eager for war and did not attack the Arab villages. Quote, "Despite the fact that skirmishes and battles have begun, the Jews at this stage are still trying to contain the fighting to as narrow a sphere as possible in the hope that partition will be implemented and a Jewish government formed. They hope that if fighting remains limited, the Arabs will acquiesce in the fait accompli. This can be seen from the fact that the Jews have not so far attacked Arab villages unless the inhabitants of those villages attack them or provoke them first." In his 2004 book, The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem Revisited, Benny Morris wrote, quote, "A detailed analysis of the causes of the abandonment of 392 Palestinian towns and villages during the 1947-1948 war found that, quote, expulsion by Jewish forces accounted for the abandonment of just 53 towns and villages, or only 13.5% of Palestinian refugees. For the Palestinians who fled the war, for whatever reason, where did they go? Those who left Palestine primarily went to Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt. Others went to areas of Palestine with more significant Arab populations. Those who left Palestine found they could not return. Israel refused to allow it for security reasons, but also because it became completely impractical as the number of Palestinian refugees skyrocketed. Over time, Palestinian populations in Gaza and the West Bank grew into the millions, as did those outside Palestine. According to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, there are now nearly 2.4 million registered Palestinian refugees in Jordan, 584,000 in Syria, and 491,000 in Lebanon, as well as 1,476,000 in Gaza and 871,000 in the West Bank, for a total of some 5.9 million UNRWA-registered Palestinian refugees. If you're asking how did this happen, that's the right question. The Palestinian exodus, or Nakba, began as the dislocation of some 700,000 Palestinian Arabs. How did we get to 5.9 million? The answer is the United Nations. We'll learn much more about UNRWA in episode 28. As it relates to the topic of this episode, we can just hit on a few points. First, when UNRWA was created in 1949, specifically to care for Palestinian refugees, it defined refugees to include descendants of refugees. This was unlike the UN's definition for refugees everywhere else in the world. UNRWA's website shows its definition of refugees. Quote, Palestinian refugees are defined as persons whose normal place of residence was Palestine during the period June 1st, 1946 to May 15th, 1948, and who lost both home and means of livelihood as a result of the 1948 conflict. The descendants of Palestine refugee males, including adopted children, are also eligible for registration. When the agency began operations in 1950, it was responding to the needs of about 750,000 Palestine refugees. Today, some 5.9 million Palestine refugees are eligible for UNRWA services. For comparison, the UNHCR definition of refugee is, quote, refugees are people forced to flee their own country and seek safety in another country. They are unable to return to their own country because of feared persecution as a result of who they are, what they believe in or say, or because of armed conflict, violence, or serious public disorder. It does not include descendants. Among other problems this created, it made any discussion of a right of return for Palestinians impossible because Israel could never absorb so many new citizens without ceasing to be either a Jewish state or a democracy. This is a major issue for Palestinians because the right of return has always been a fundamental demand. And it is a major issue for Israel because it was founded specifically to be both a Jewish state and a democracy. Second, and again we'll learn more about UNRWA later in this series, we know UNRWA has been complicit in teaching Palestinians as early as kindergarten that Jews are evil and martyring oneself is glorious. This indoctrination has done terrible harm, not just in fostering division, hatred, and terrorism, but in pushing young Palestinians down a path that offers them nothing but misery. So it was horrible but not surprising that UNRWA employees participated with Hamas in the October 7th attack. The Times of Israel reported on recordings of UNRWA staff bragging about capturing Jews during Hamas's October 7th attack. Quote, we have female hostages. I captured one, says Yosef al-Hawajara, a Hamas terrorist who worked as a teacher at an UNRWA school in Deir al-Balah. In fact, the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, was himself an UNRWA teacher, as the title of this article says. The article goes on to report, quote, in February, the IDF found a large tunnel containing extensive infrastructure for Hamas's military intelligence wing under UNRWA's headquarters in Gaza. Weapons were also found in the headquarters itself. UNRWA's schools have consistently been found to use material directly inciting students to terrorism and anti-Semitism. Has UNRWA fought for the rights of Palestinians to be accepted in other Arab nations, even when Jordan controlled the West Bank or when Egypt controlled Gaza, or since then? Instead, everything UNRWA has done seems designed to keep Palestinians as permanent refugees fixated on Israel as the only acceptable solution for the nearly 6 million people that UNRWA designates as refugees. There's just no way to look at the situation of Palestinians and think UNRWA has helped them. UNRWA was not alone in contributing to Palestinians becoming permanent refugees. On the other side, Arab nations have refused to accept more Palestinian refugees than those who came to their countries during the 1948 war and some after the 1967 war. Primarily, this is for reasons related to their political stability and economics. Instead, they have kept many Palestinians in refugee camps, insisting pointlessly for many decades now that they and their descendants be allowed to return to Israel. The Arab nations knew that Israel would never be able to accept millions of Palestinian refugees, but they cared little for the resulting hardship on Palestinians. In contrast, the majority of Palestinians who remained in Israel were granted full Israeli citizenships with all the rights of Jewish citizens. Today, they number over 2 million. Palestinians who left, fled, or were expelled from Palestine in the period around the 1948 Arab-Israeli War have obviously had an extremely difficult path. War is terrible for local populations, and the conflict between Jews and Arabs is no exception. However, the roles of Arab leaders and the United Nations have made things much, much worse than they should have been. Thank you for continuing to watch our series, What the Hell is Going On in Gaza? We hope you got a better understanding of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. If you'd like to leave a comment or get in touch, visit our website at www.getthefactsmiddleeast.com. There's a lot more to learn in this series, so please continue with episode 16, where we'll take a closer look at the facts around the conflicts and wars that followed. There were many. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your interest in learning more about the war in Gaza. And remember, where there is no knowledge, there can be no insight.